Cool. What's good, y'all? Welcome to a special emergency episode of Conversation Piece. My name is Patrick Armstrong. I am your host. 2026 is the year of the people, and today we are going to be discussing the recent environmental disasters that the city of Indianapolis and the state of Indiana has been experiencing here in recent weeks. As most of you listening probably know, I am not an environmental expert myself, but I am joined by two folks from the Hoosier Environmental Council who have more knowledge than I do when it comes to these conversations. And so I'm really excited to be able to sit down with them today and get into where we are currently, how we got there, and where we can go from here. So it is my great honor and privilege to welcome Rebecca Tukolsky and Jason Donati to the show. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much for having us.
Absolutely. We are in interesting times at the moment, I feel like, not just here in the city, but across the state. And so I appreciate y'all taking a moment out of, I'm sure, a busy schedule to have this conversation, not just with me, but with anybody who might be tuning in. So thank you. I was wondering for the people at home who are tuning in, if you wouldn't mind sharing just a little bit about yourselves as we get started.
Sure. Yeah. My name is Jason Donati. I'm the Water Program and Policy Director for Hoosier Environmental Council. I've been with the Hoosier Environmental Council team for about 3 months, but prior to that, I worked a lot in local government in the city of Muncie for the Muncie Sanitary District. Did a lot of environmental education in the stormwater programs there. I've led the White River cleanup in that area in Delaware County for the last 16 years, and then done a lot of work in recycling and different environmental efforts in that area. And so I'm diving right in, excited to be a part of the HEC team. And then, you know, things like this happen at the spur of the moment and cause us all to think about this more. So thanks for having me. And I'm glad to be on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining me. Rebecca?
Hey, I'm Rebecca Tukolsky. I am the Climate and Energy Director at Hoosier Environmental Council. And Jason is really our expert on water, hands down. So a lot of this is going to be focused on his expertise, but I can help us zoom out and position this moment in sort of the overall climate experience that we're having, and more specifically talk about some of the policy context as it relates to our energy systems and the way that they are transforming the opportunity for these kinds of floods to happen. So that's what I can do.
Awesome. And before we get too deep into the weeds, I was wondering if one of y'all could share a little bit about what is the Hoosier Environmental Council and kind of what their function and role is here in the city or in the state, I guess.
Yeah. So Hoosier Environmental Council is the oldest and, depending on how you count, the biggest of the environmental groups in the state. We were founded in 1983, I believe. You can fact check me on that. And we have a really strong history, both at the policy level and at the program level, of advocating for clean air, clean water, natural lands, and affordable clean energy is kind of the areas that we focus on. So we do that work of preserving natural lands and water quality and things of that nature. But we also look ahead and think about, as we are looking to the future of kind of the state of Indiana, what does it look like to be environmental stewards when we are staring down the potential for massive new air pollution through the advent of data centers and et cetera, et cetera. So that's what we do. We look at those kind of 4 areas and try to be the best stewards of our local environment that we can.
Okay. And what, you said you've been here for 3 months now with the HEC. What brought you from where you were to here?
I've always been passionate about water, and it's something I wanted to get back into. And I also wanted to have more of an impact statewide. Working in the local Muncie community has been great. It's my hometown, and pulling tires and stuff out of the river is great. But I feel like there was a really big need for, working on policy statewide and being in other communities and really bringing this all together so I can have a larger impact.
Okay, cool. I like it. All right. Well, let's dive into kind of where we're at the moment. I am going to reference kind of a timeline that was laid out by friend of the show, Wildstyle Pichelle, earlier today. And so I'm just going to kind of run through a couple things and then we'll go from there. So on Wednesday, August 12th, we started to experience high wind storms and torrential rain across central and east Indiana. And Indianapolis did experience a little bit of localized stormwater flooding in a few different areas. Muncie began evacuations at 9:50 in the morning because of said flooding. And the city also started to provide sandbags in an effort to support residents and protect savable areas. That same afternoon, the mayor of Muncie talked about the storms dumping more rain than the Great Flood of 1913. At the same time, Hamilton County and Anderson received warnings. Residents in those areas received warnings about potential flooding and were provided sandbags if needed. Thursday, August 13th, the water got to 30 miles away. The town of Pendleton declares a state of emergency. Yorktown, Indiana, at this time is underwater. The mayor of Anderson is declaring a state of emergency and orders evacuations around 6 p.m. And then at this time, national news had started to pick up on the flooding that was happening in Indiana. On Friday, August 14th, 8:30 a.m., Hamilton County declares a state of emergency. 2:40 p.m., the White River overtops the dam at Westfield Boulevard, North Broad Ripple, and at 6 p.m., Ravenswood, Rocky Ripple, and Nora received an alert from the city of Indianapolis and the Department of Public Works. At 8:20, North Broad Ripple was given about 70 minutes via social media to begin evacuating so that DPW could close the floodgates. And once those floodgates closed, if you are inside those gates, whether it's emergency vehicle, residential vehicle, you can't get out. The gates are closed. Those gates did not close until 11:30 p.m. In order for more people to be able to be evacuated. 8:28, Rocky Ripple receives the same advisory and is also told to stop making sandbags and evacuate. However, the residents and the volunteers of Rocky Ripple continued to fill sandbags, which I believe they got up to 15,000, which saved a lot more because of that. Saturday, August 15th, 1:40 a.m., Ravenswood is told to evacuate, and it begins to flood. At 11:30 a.m., Mayor Hogsett makes his first address to the city as flooding is already occurring. That's essentially the timeline and is very Indianapolis-centric and Southern Indianapolis-centric. I know as of this recording, I think at least 7 people have died because of the flooding. Thousands of people currently impacted. In addition to the floods that we have experienced, really severe storms have hit all across the Midwest and different parts of Indiana, particularly Northwest Indiana and Gary, where as of this recording, Tuesday, August 18th, still over 100,000 people are without power. I also know that Cambridge City, another city in Indiana, is also underwater. So that was a lot. Long timeline, short timeline, lots of things happening. What am I missing?
No, I mean, you shared a really important timeline because when it comes to disasters like this, you have to think about things in a watershed sense.
Okay.
So yeah, in Muncie, we were impacted right away. A lot of the rainfall happened in that area. I think, there's estimates of we received between 8 and 9 inches of rain in 40 hours. That's a significant amount of rain. Newcastle and Henry County actually received over 11 inches in that short period of time. But the way that water moves throughout the watershed is something that a lot of us don't pay attention to. We pay attention to municipal boundaries and town lines and all that, but we're more interconnected through our watersheds. So when a bunch of rain hits somewhere else and travels to you, then you start to think like, wow, I'm connected to a broader community.
Yeah.
And being from Muncie, that's what I saw. We watched the White River, and I live, a couple blocks from it. We watched the White River just continue to rise higher than we've ever seen in our lifetime. There was a couple communities that broke the 1913 Rivercrest flood record. Anderson did by almost a foot, and there's a gauge in Noblesville that broke the record. And it's hard to fathom how much rain and how much flooding had happened. And so you just start to see it travel down, and you start to see it impact communities in different ways. And the landscape has changed so much since 1913, right?
Sure.
So that's our historical data, but the landscape has changed tremendously. And all of these communities that have levee systems were built in the 40s and 50s.
Okay.
So like the flood of 1913, they're saying the estimates back then, if you look at old newspaper clippings, it was between 5 and 6 inches of rain. And it was in the spring. It was in March, at the end of March. Well, and with the landscape back then, pre-levee, and now with our landscape now, with all this development, all this hard surface, we've removed all these wetlands and all these different, landscape areas that help capture that flood water. It just really makes you think a lot about the planning and long-term planning and what it's going to be like from here on out.
Yeah.
And that's something we really need to think about.
I appreciate you sharing that, because I think like conversations that I've heard recently or in the recent days have been like, basically there's not a lot that we could have done, like 1 in 1,000 year floods. Like, I guess they happen every 1,000 years, it's like, but you said that our levee system hadn't been updated since like the 40s or 50s. Is that what
Most of our levee systems were built in the 40s and 50s.
Okay.
Especially in Muncie. I know that the city tried to do its own levee system, which was very unsuccessful.
Yeah.
So the Army Corps came in and between 1940 and 1950 built a levee system. And then we're responsible for maintaining and inspections and making sure that levee, ever since Katrina, it's got even more hyper-focused on the levee systems and how well they're up to date and if they're functional. And so we have to go through inspections on an annual basis with the Army Corps to make sure the levee is doing what it's supposed to do or intended to do if a major storm comes.
Okay.
Can I also jump in here, because you said something really interesting that I want to dig in a little deeper on about all these hard surfaces, right? So when Jason was talking about the Great Flood of 1913 was only 5 or 6 inches of rain, and we know we got significantly more rain in the past 2 weeks than that amount, and yet we have a very different impact today in terms of the amount of high water rise. And so when Jason is talking about, and I'll let you dive in here more because you know the technical stuff on this, but when Jason's talking about all these hard surfaces, he's actually talking about cities that have been developed, right? We have more pavement, we have more houses, we have more manufacturing infrastructure. And what that does is when you have trees and roots and wetlands, that water can get captured in those plains, can get captured in the roots, can stay in the place that it is, versus if there's a hard surface, that's a much more water that's running off of the surface at the same time, which is what ultimately causes these kind of flash flooding. Well, it contributes, it exacerbates these kinds of flash flooding events because basically all that water is coming at once, as opposed to if it were coming in a longer time horizon. And even the absorption of 5, 10, 12 hours can make a huge difference because you're not absorbing millions or tens of millions of gallons of water in an instant. Mm-hmm. And instead you have a little bit more time for that pipe, the stormwater pipe or whatever, to absorb that. So that's one thing in terms of sort of how we got here is the functional aspect of how cities are built.
Yeah. It's changed the language. Like you've heard a lot of people throw around a 1 in 1,000 year event or 1 in 500 year and 1 in 100. Nobody really knows what that means. What it kind of technically meant was that there's a 1% chance in 100 years that you're going to have a flooding event or a rain event like that.
Sure.
But that's not even accurate. And who has 1,000 years of historical data?
Right.
Like
right.
People are just throwing these things out there to like confuse us. But really, these flooding events are happening 3 or 4 times a year now.
Yeah.
So you can't even use that language anymore. And a lot of people are talking about that, like stop using that language because it doesn't even make sense anymore in the current climate situation we're dealing with. So
That makes a lot of sense because I think we're in the social media age where information travels instantly and it's easy to sensationalize something like this and throw around language because it gets clicks and likes and views. But at the same time, it distorts the reality and also kind of glosses over, like you said, we've been experiencing flooding events a little bit more frequently than every 100, every 50, every 10 years even. You talked about the levee systems. You have to go each year and inspect those, make sure they're working properly. Is that something that has to be done? Is every town in the city or every town in the state of Indiana doing something like that? Do they all have levee systems available to them?
Not everyone, but there's a really cool map on the Army Corps' website where you can look at every single levee system and find detailed reports and inspections and information about them. And when you look at the whole country, there's just dots everywhere, right?
Okay.
And they could be earthen levee, they could be flood walls, they could be flood gates, they could be all these different types of levees. But usually there's a managing entity in every community that is responsible for the maintenance and taking care of those levees. And the Army Corps just makes sure that they're being taken care of so they're ready for events. And so in Muncie, it's the Muncie Sanitary District that's the authority that oversees the levees. And the thing about the levees in Muncie, though, were we had two specific neighborhoods that had severe flooding. They were upstream of the levee system. So they weren't even in the levee system, and that's where most of the flooding happened. Our levee system worked in Muncie and protected, all of the downtown area, all of the Ball State University area. It was a huge test for our system, one that we've never seen before, and it worked. And it worked in part because the levee's been maintained and taken care of. But it also worked, going back to what Rebecca was saying, is because we've added flood protection green infrastructure. We added a 27-acre wetland that's more upstream in the Muncie area. It was an old industrial site that we actually turned into a constructed 27-acre wetland. When the river flooded at its peak, there was 5 foot of water, 5 foot deep water in the wetland doing what it was supposed to do. Okay. And then we also added other flood projects and new earthen levee aspects. So this was a real test for the community in Muncie to see how those systems work. And we need more. That's what we know. We need more protection.
For sure. This might sound like a dumb question.
No dumb questions.
I love to hear that the levee system worked the way that it was supposed to in Muncie. And these two kind of surrounding towns did end up feeling the effects of the floods and ended up flooding. Does a properly maintained levee system impact the way that water might approach other towns that find themselves outside of the levee system?
It does, unfortunately. Okay. Yeah, because it's not cost effective to build an entire levee, throughout the watershed. But what is cost effective is putting green infrastructure and constructed wetlands and riparian corridors that border these waterways. That's cost effective. That saves lives, saves money, and way more doable than just installing a levee system across the board. And so an example is in Yorktown, they experienced severe flooding. They're the first, large town downstream of Muncie. And they experienced flooding mainly because Buck Creek, which is a tributary into the White River, overflowed. And so you start to think you're putting levees around major rivers, but what about the creeks that are leading into it?
Sure.
And so that creek had actually spilled over, and so the river and the creek had spilled over, and it had flooded their library in that area, downtown Yorktown. I think they had 4 to 5 feet of water in it, and the school and everything was underwater.
Okay. Because as I said it, I realized that I probably, without Googling it, probably wouldn't be able to accurately define what a levee system is. Do you mind just giving us a quick definition of what a levee is for folks that might not know?
Again, the Army took the lead on that.
Sure.
They can build a flood wall, they can build an earthen system, but it's basically just In some cases, they'll even widen and deepen the river channels, but it's supposed to just hold in the water. So when we experience a high rainfall event or raging rivers, and it's built to hold in that water and to protect all of the assets near there, all the neighborhoods and communities that could be impacted if the levee wasn't in place. And a lot of that was based on the flood of 1913. We know the flood of 1913 spread out and flooded this whole area. And so a lot of those projections and how big that needed to be and how deep that needed to be was based on that historic event. But I don't think it's sufficient enough. Like, honestly, I think we were pretty lucky to not have more severe flooding, more people harmed by what we just experienced, because that was a historic event for sure.
Yeah. Where are the insufficiencies at? Where would you say that they need to be bolstered or whatever the case might be?
Well, I mean, with climate change and all the extreme events we're experiencing, I know when I went back and read some climate change information and factual information that the Purdue Climate Assessment put together, I think in 2018, they said that we're experiencing 5.6 more inches of rain annually in 2018. Like, that's significant. And so I'm sure we'll talk about the Dig Indy project, but those projections I've heard were, 2000 numbers, right? Like year 2000 numbers. Well, we're continuing to exceed all those numbers and expectations with rainfall and intense rainfall and the seasonality shifts of when the rain falls. Like the flood of 1913 happened at the end of March. Who'd have thought we'd have a major flood in August?
Right.
Usually we're dry. Yeah. So it's changing so much. It's so unpredictable.
I appreciate you sharing the Purdue Climate Assessment, because, like you said, that's 2019, already tracking and showing that, hey, we're experiencing a lot more rain. Mm-hmm. And yet I feel like a narrative that has been going around has been like this idea that how would we have known that this was going to happen? And so I'm wondering, like, how much did we know going in to something like this? And I guess let's start there. Like, how, from your perspective, Rebecca, how much were we aware of? Since obviously even 7 years ago, we were somewhat cognizant that we were receiving more rain, but I'm assuming that people thought, well, we'll never receive enough rain for this type of event to happen.
Yeah, I mean, these are known unknowns, right?
Sure.
Like, everything is a probability. So nobody is able to say, no scientist is able to say a flood event is going to happen in this month or in this year. But you
can't predict the future.
You can't predict the future. I can't predict the future. But the evidence does indicate not just that there is more rain, but when it's happening at more concentrated levels.
Okay.
So that, like, for example, the rainstorm on August 1st, it wasn't as much rainfall as the one on August 15th, but it was much higher intensity when it happened. And so, I just think about my gutters in my house, like, they were not able to absorb handle the amount of water that came into that particular rainstorm because it was happening at such an intense level. And actually, that was the day that my basement flooded, not this last week. So when we think about that, like, on a city level, we're experiencing that same phenomenon, but across the public infrastructure that we have. And so when you think about, so the city of Indianapolis just finished the Dig Indy project, which Jason alluded to, and that project was intended to handle a sewage waste problem. But when they built it to a size that corresponded to rainwater numbers from 1996 to 2000. They didn't look ahead and say, this public infrastructure is going to be in place for the next 50 years. We know we're getting increased rainfall, and we know that the rainfall is happening at more intensive levels. Maybe we should make the pipe bigger.
Sure.
And so it does in a lot of ways solve the sewage problem, but as it's a combined sewer and intended to solve both the sewage and the stormwater problem, I think that the lesson here is that we have to use real data to make decisions. We have to make these decisions based on empirical evidence of what's actually happening, because there are real consequences to human health, well-being, property values, and human life if we don't do that. So, yeah.
one of the things that I saw in the last couple of days is I think the city has been talking about diverting like this type of funding for this type of infrastructure away to fix like roads and stuff, like talking about the wheel tax and how that's been a thing that's been happening in our local government here recently. And I'm interested in like your take on why we choose to approach it from like a half measure situation as opposed to like, okay, let's consider not only 50 years into the future, but the ripple effects of how we address this one problem that we're thinking about addressing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hesitate to speculate on the exact rationale for the Dig Indy project.
Sure.
So I think I'm going to talk a little bit more in like what I've seen generally, which is that when it comes to planning and budgeting projects like this, we often do get preempted at the state level. So the city might have a good way of approaching it. In this case, that was a citizens energy project. And
Sure.
I know there was some state involvement, but I don't know exactly how that played out. But with the wheel tax, I know that one was, there were a number of measures that were intended at the state house that the state government fought against Indianapolis's intention to put more funding into our roads. So it is a lot of interplay between the city government and the state government, both from the perspective of funding and also from the perspective of values. And I think that's what we're really, what we're facing as we work at the State House, right? Like we know that climate change is real. We look at the evidence and we see that. And we see Hoosiers across the state increasingly believing that and increasingly seeing the impacts in their own lives. But we also know that some of the people that we work with, that's not a persuasive argument, right?
Sure.
And so we do sort of have to come at all of our work with kind of two angles of focus. One is the empirical evidence and one is the sort of like the real political context that we live. And so I think that that's, as it relates to like, why are we doing this from a half measures perspective? I think a lot of times we're absolutely doing the best we can with like very little resources.
Right.
And then also I think there is a reticence to look ahead because it is more expensive to put a bigger pipe in. It is more expensive to acknowledge, maybe the things that we've been planning for the last 100 years might need to change because we didn't anticipate all this stuff. And so it's in terms of new flooding, new heat events, because it's not just the floods, right? We're experiencing climate related emergencies in terms of flooding, but also in terms of heat events, which we helped to pass protections this last legislative session so that the utilities can't shut off your heat or your air conditioning on high heat days because, people's medication goes bad, people die of heat stroke, and those events are happening more too. So I think there is really a hesitancy to admit that this is happening because then we have to do something about it, at least at the state level.
Well, I think another thing that's interesting too is that like you said, a lot more people are at least like starting to not believe, but like just factually understand because of their own lived experience that climate change and the crises that are occurring because of that is like actually happening.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of hard when you lose power for 2 weeks or if your entire neighborhood goes underwater to be like, well, like it's just going to happen. Like, no, this is happening because of certain things that are going on. And I think that like one with the water, like I think a lot of times Indiana gets stereotyped as being like landlocked, which it is, but that doesn't mean that we're not next to bodies of water that when like isolated, like heavy amounts of rain come, won't then negatively affect the people that surround those areas. Additionally, I think that what we're starting to come around to, especially not just with the rain, but like with the droughts and with the heat and the change there, is that the Midwest is not insulated from the effects of climate change.
Right.
What are those conversations like you talked about, you have to use empirical evidence and also take the political context into consideration. Like, how do you thread that needle to get both sides to understand, like, we have to kind of work together within the system that we find ourselves in to make the changes that we need to make.
You are asking about making sausage, my friend, and it is a tricky process indeed. I mean, I think there are some like bottom line things that we can all agree on. That's a really important starting place for us. Do we agree with every single member of our General Assembly on all things? No, but we did work really closely with on some of the bills this year, including like we testified on a bill related to surplus interconnection, and that's just a way for the utilities to get energy onto the grid more efficiently.
Sure.
That helps people because it's, less pollution. It helps people because it's less infrastructure, so the costs go down. It helps utilities because the costs go down. And it's just a very common sense solution that helps to solve some of the problems that we're facing. Now, that is one good example. We face a lot of challenges. And one of the ones that specifically relates to this, and Jason knows I was going to bring this up, is one of the things that Hoosier Environmental Council has really been a leader on for a number of years. Not me, Indra Frank, our lovely coal ash director, has been working on protecting Indiana communities from coal ash, which can leave heavy metals in our drinking water for decades. And as we're thinking about the EPA is rolling back coal ash rules, we are thinking about keeping our coal plants online longer to support data centers and other increases in electricity demand. And meanwhile, all the coal ash that's already in the state of Indiana is being stored largely in unlined ponds, some of which dip under the water table into the groundwater. And then during flood events like this, like there's coal ash on Harding Street. There's an old coal plant just a couple miles from here on Harding Street. And if the White River floods, that coal ash can get dumped into the White River and then carried downstream to all the communities below us in the watershed. And so this is all interconnected, and it's all really critical that we get this right, because we're impacting, as we are thinking about keeping coal online to support data centers that will exacerbate these problems, which are obviously causing problems in real time for real communities. And so I think, when we think about kind of climate change solutions, there's kind of two different areas of work. One is mitigation and one is adaptation. And if you haven't heard those terms before, mitigation is sort of the side of the aisle that I work on, where it's like, how do we get enough electrons onto our grid without exacerbating these problems? How do we transform our grid from being expensive and polluting through coal to being clean and affordable through solar, wind, batteries, and other renewable technologies? That's my side of the aisle. How do we make this problem better? And then Jason's side of the aisle is more the adaptation. Since we know it's a problem, how do we get more sandbags? How do we make sure that we have better alert systems? How do we make sure our levees are working properly so that when this inevitable part of the equation comes to fruition, we're ready to mitigate the disaster that can follow? And so we have to be thinking about both, but we have to use real evidence to inform policy on both. Because if we're gonna look at the 2000 numbers for rainwater and build a brand new $2 billion dig Indy system based on that, and then the first time there's a major event, tens of thousands of homes are flooded because we didn't know that was going to happen when we had the evidence that it was. So that's a real challenge.
And nature-based solutions are more affordable than gray infrastructure. Yeah. To expand the pipe is going to cost a lot of money, and who pays for that? We all do, right? But nature-based solutions were there originally. They say that 24% of Indiana was wetlands, and the rest was forests and woodlands. Well, it's not that anymore.
No.
But it is affordable and wise to construct wetlands and repair these areas. And I gave that example in Muncie. An old industrial site that was cleaned up was turned into a constructed wetland that served a very meaningful purpose and could have potentially saved homes and lives with what it did. So that's the approach. Green infrastructure, nature-based solutions is something that, Indy's doing, other communities are doing, because a lot of the combined sewer separation projects, those were unfunded mandates. Yeah. The EPA said, we have to do these, and I'm glad they did. You know, we needed to address the combined sewer situation, but they're unfunded mandates. All of the federal money was spent really quickly that was allocated for long-term control plans and combined sewer separation. It was spent in Wisconsin and Minneapolis. They got it first, I think, is the story I've heard. And so when it comes to all of us who are working to separate our sewers to prevent sewage from going directly to our waterways, it's very expensive.
Yeah.
But green infrastructure plays a very important role in that, and a more sustainable role.
What kind of barriers do you face when talking about green infrastructure? Because you talked about like common sense. Like that seems like something to me that makes sense. And clearly in Muncie, it's working when it's been implemented. I can think of probably a number of reasons as to why people would be like, no, we don't want to do this. But what are you seeing from your perspective? Like, what are you coming up against when it comes to these solutions?
Well, the barriers that I see, because someone's got a better sales pitch, right?
Okay, yeah, sure.
I can sell you a pipe, or I can sell you some native plants and teach you how to build a rain garden. You know, like if you go down Mass Ave and see all these rain gardens, and some people might drive by and say, why'd they put weeds in a dip or depression, not knowing the bigger picture there, that it's capturing and treating stormwater runoff on site, and how impactful that is. And there's some maintenance associated with that. Like, one of the worst things mistakes I've seen communities make is they'll put in all of this green infrastructure, but then they won't set aside money for maintenance.
Okay. Yep.
Well, that's not good, because if you build this green infrastructure and you don't set aside money for maintenance, that best management practice is doing its job. But it's like the levee. If you're not inspecting it and making sure that it's still functional, it's going to actually hold toxins. It's going to be a bad thing.
Well, it's going to collect that coal ash, like you're talking about.
Yeah. And so it's really important to educate people and have those conversations at the municipal level to make sure that we're all working together. You know, a lot of floodplain administrators are like, in these small communities, there are people who already have other jobs. Like they're like the building commissioner, and they're wearing like 3 hats.
Okay.
And so there has to be more of a prioritized focus on helping smaller communities and all communities with our planning and what we're doing to address the inevitable. And that's what's happening right before our eyes.
Yeah. Well, I think that's something that I've seen. I mean, we see it for everything, but across the country. But like Indianapolis getting so much focus, and then again, like my feed is full of people from Gary saying, why is nobody talking about this?
Yep.
When they've been just without power now for 2 going on 3 weeks. I'm interested in, like, we've talked about how like the state has to kind of work together, figure out a way to work together, not only to support big infrastructure, but the smaller communities and towns surrounding those larger cities. How does that interplay with like federal responses? So I think the administration released some funding, like not much or something for FEMA.
No, we haven't met that threshold yet.
Okay, great.
So yeah, I think like FEMA to actually consider like sending us resources and money, I think we have to reach like a $13 million damage threshold or something.
Oh, okay.
So like that's why it's so important for people to report damage right now.
Oh, okay.
And you can do that on 211. You can either call 211 or go online. But that's super important that people report the damage, and so they can have a broader picture and assess how much damage actually happened. But they just declared it a disaster area, and they said 53 counties experienced a disaster event. But that doesn't necessarily translate to dollars and resources yet.
I'm interested too then about like the lead in. So this current administration, when they came in, have been slashing agencies and funding to agencies and resources to a lot of different places. But the National Weather Service and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration both experienced really severe cuts or have experienced those cuts here recently. And the issue that I've seen come up in relation to that is weather balloons, which are used to help with tracking and prediction. And so I'm interested in this because I think when I talk to some folks who are maybe a little skeptical, they think that, well, why are we spending money on these balloons anyway? What are they actually doing? And I don't think people really understand the ripple effects that happen when we remove like the ability to be able to not necessarily predict, but at least have an accurate read on something is happening and we should probably get out in front of it instead of react to it. Can y'all talk about like that interplay and like how that kind of trickles down?
Yeah, I mean, so the way that I paid attention even to the recent flood was through the USGS gauges that, are federal gauges throughout the White River.
Yeah.
We used to have 2 in Muncie. We're down to 1. So you're going to see more and more. And then NOAA has a great website on prediction, right? Like these tools save lives. And without them, I fear, what could happen. And we're seeing, any agency cuts like that are definitely going to trickle down and have an impact on small communities like this. I know in our community, we lost a communication tower in the flood. And so we actually don't even have a tornado siren in the area now. So hopefully we're fine as they figure out how to fix that and work on that particular issue. But again, a lot of these important things that are happening in local communities have been supported by state and federal funds and agencies that are super vital to the safety and everything that we depend on. So that's a major issue that we need to pay close attention to.
Well, it's interesting to me because, like you've been talking about, we have a lot of empirical data that says we're heading in maybe the wrong direction, or if we don't do these things, then we're going to be heading in that direction. And yet we consistently have made choices that kind of pushes the majority of that data to the side or uses old data per se to make decisions. How confident are you that this will have a positive impact on the response to some of the things that we need to do, nature-based solutions and otherwise, as we kind of slowly start to turn an eye towards the road ahead?
Yeah, I mean, that's our job, right?
It's your job.
Yeah, because disasters, bring it to everyone's attention, right? Especially those who have been impacted, right? So many people have been impacted. So now we have to take it to that policy shift and you talk about wetland legislation in Indiana. There's been multiple bills that have become law that have diluted the regulations that protect our wetlands. When we know we need those wetlands, we need more wetlands to help us in these situations.
Yeah.
There was a law that was helpful, right? That was passed that incentivized if you're a homeowner or if you're a landowner that has wetlands, you can receive incentives if you register that and you protect that. So we've seen that. That's a good law. But that's what we're going to have to do is continue to speak about it, advocate for it at the State House and everywhere we can to try to, use that to shift policy and make changes that are needed. And that's a lot of work. That's a lot of work that we'll be focused on.
Yeah.
I just want to add something to that. Now, we don't know exactly what the makeup of the legislature is going to be in 2027. There's an election coming up, and there's a lot of very close races and a lot of incumbents on the majority caucus were unseated in the primary. So we don't really know exactly what things are going to look like. But we are hearing that there might be some additional anti-wetlands legislation coming down the pike. So with that in mind, and with the caveat that I work on other bills, I just want to kind of put out to our audience that if you're interested in getting involved at the State House, lawmakers love when regular people come and testify. Lawmakers think that it is the coolest thing that somebody took an hour out of their workday to come and share their perspective about something that matters to them. And so if you're interested in being a part of that, get in contact with us because we can help you prepare your talking points and coach you on whatever. But it is one of the most impactful things that you can do and help us do our job better is to get involved at the State House. So just wanted to put that on your radar.
Totally. I mean, we saw it happen with redistricting last year.
Yeah.
And sorry.
Which is coming back.
Yeah. And I think unfortunately, it usually takes direct impact for people to feel like they have an opportunity or it makes sense for them to get involved. But again, it's like we shouldn't wait for the thing to happen to react. We should be proactive in how, like, the laws that are going through the State House, the way that we're talking about those things, and so forth as we move forward here. Part of the moving forward, and you touched on it a little bit, is like the data center of it all.
Yeah.
And we have been labeled, I think, maybe the friendliest state to data center manufacturers, builders, developers. And water and energy have been the big talking points for communities in terms of like the impact that they're going to see. How much would an increase in these data centers negatively impact or maybe exacerbate some of the situations that led us to where we are right now?
Yeah, this is, I think, the $1 million question. I think this is something that local officials, state officials, national officials, scientists are all kind of grappling with at the same time, because the advent of data centers and particularly their energy requirements are, in my opinion, and I will speak in this specific moment, I'm speaking for myself, I believe that they are the biggest threat to climate change issues that we've seen in our lifetimes, in the sense that, you know, we are looking at potentially 50% or more of Indiana's existing energy need just to serve data centers. And we don't know yet because it depends on what projects get approved and all this stuff. But we've seen lots of projections that indicate that there's going to be a massive amount of new demand. And what that means in practice, we're seeing through the federal government issuing 202(c) orders to keep coal plants online, and then also through utilities and their integrated resources planning processes, both projecting to keep coal plants online longer than originally anticipated and to build new gas turbines to support these data centers. So that obviously has air emissions impacts, which exacerbate climate change. But at the same time, I was alluding to before, the issues with the coal ash and the storage of that waste. And so from the perspective of the existing 2015 rules on coal ash, some of that storage doesn't have to be finalized until the plant goes out of operation. So we're extending that timeline for when this can be really stored properly. And then in addition to that, the EPA is trying to roll back some of those protections so they may never get cleaned up in a real way. And if you don't know this, because I didn't know this, Indiana has the most coal ash ponds of all the lower 48 states. So we are particularly, and in addition to that, you know, we do have like our watershed impacts a massive amount of the rest of the country. So this is local, but it's also national in terms of the true impact of data centers are having this direct effect on our energy planning system, which is then having literally a downstream effect on our water system. And so I think the true environmental impact of this really can't be understated and can't be overstated, shouldn't be understated. And then there's affordability issues on the back end of that too that are really deeply important to us as well. But I think that the truth is that we are making decisions at a state policy level that are making our climate goals, for all intents and purposes, impossible to achieve.
So would that be the biggest roadblock in terms of like pushing and pursuing clean energy solutions or alternatives, I guess, to like putting up more gas turbines and like keeping the coal plants open longer? Like, is it simply just that the state policy is just standing in the way?
Yes and no. I mean, I think that's an oversimplification in some ways. So there's I'm forgetting the name of the nonprofit, but there's this Clean Grid Alliance. They have this really simple way of thinking about this, which is reduce demand, electrify everything, green the grid. And so the reduced demand is their first pillar. And if data centers are blowing that out of the water. So that's the first pillar. Yeah. The second one is electrify everything, right? So with this one, data centers are getting their electricity from the grid for the most part, but sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're running gas engines on site for their primary power. So that's another aspect of this. And then the third one is greening the grid. So yes, reducing the percentage of grid electrons that are coming from gas and coal, absolutely an important part of that. But if you have 15 new gas turbines and an equivalent amount of solar both getting added, the reduced demand part is really the important part of that, because the air doesn't care whether it's 50% of the energy you're producing. It cares that there were 5 new turbines added, right? And I think that was a really complicated way of saying that, so I'm sorry.
No, it's all good. It's
I'm
all
sorry.
good.
You can try that again if you want, but basically the point being that if we're adding new fossil fuel burning operations, it doesn't matter that we've also added solar, right? Because we're still adding pollution into the air regardless of how much additional solar we add. It's really about reducing that amount of gas and coal. But more specifically at the state level, what we're experiencing today is we really are having a hard time siting renewables. So the way the utility planning process works, the utilities put together this big model and they say, okay, we need this amount of electricity at these times of day, this amount of seasonality changes, et cetera, et cetera. What is the most cost-effective and reliable way to meet these needs? And then they put a bunch of different options into a model. So they put wind, solar, gas, batteries, coal, et cetera. And at that point, the model is going to say, okay, your best portfolio looks like this. It has this much solar, it has this much wind, it has this much gas, it has this much whatever. And we are seeing an increase in the amount of solar and wind that's getting selected by that model because it is the cheapest and easiest to get online.
Sure.
And at the same time, we are also seeing that when it comes to actually constructing those solar sites, we're seeing a lot of resistance at the local level. A lot. So
from communities.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So there's a lot of demystifying that needs to happen around the real risks of solar. There's a lot of misinformation around the potential for heavy metals and other chemicals leaking into the soil, disturbing of soil tiles, which I don't know anything about that, but it has to do with farming. And none of it is really empirically shown based on the way that solar is developed today. And so the really only argument that we're hearing that I can't argue with is it looks different than farmland. And so what a lot of solar developers are doing is they're putting in berms, which are basically like little manufactured hills, and they're putting in trees and all this stuff to shield the community so that they wouldn't be able to see the solar farm. And there's still this kind of cultural resistance in a lot of communities. At the same time, though, the farmers that are leasing their land are really benefiting from the solar farm because they might still be able to do agrivoltaics, which is when they put sheep on their farm. Very cool.
Yeah, okay.
They may be able to continue farming, but in almost all cases, it's going to preserve that land. It's not going to get developed as new housing. It's not going to get developed as something else. But then at the end of the 30-year lease, they're going to be able to, if they want to, reclaim that land. And in a lot of cases, the soil is actually going to be in better quality because it hasn't been farmed for 30 years. You could plant clover or something else that's nitrogen fixing. You can leave the soil in better condition than it was originally. And so there is kind of this interesting battle happening at the local level where it's landowners versus land tenants in a way, where it's the people who have to live nearby are less interested in participating, but those people who happen to have land near the transmission line that's prime for this kind of development, it actually tremendously benefits them. And so that's probably our primary conversation at the State House this year is how do we make the permitting process for solar more transparent, more streamlined, more fair to developers and community alike? Because, we do see the importance of community engagement in these kinds of conversations. But what's happening today is that the developer comes in, they don't know what the steps in the process are.
Sure.
The community doesn't hear it always when the meetings are. And then when the decision is made, sometimes it's not even based on the ordinance. And there's no mandate for these local communities to make a decision based on the guidance that they themselves produced. And so we're thinking about how can we help make these processes more favorable to everybody who's involved in them, more transparent and truly more professional.
Sure.
Yeah.
And most farmland is being swallowed up by development, not utility scale solar or any sort of renewable energy project. It's development. And so that obviously impacts water.
Yeah.
And, how many of these developments have nice nature names, right?
Sure.
It's because they filled in the ecosystem that used to be there and named the development after it. But another thing that we pay close attention to, and Susie McGovern on our team is our water science and sustainability specialist. She watches the permits, and what we're seeing is data centers are filling in and getting permission to fill in wetlands.
Yeah.
They're literally getting permission to fill in wetlands, and then they're forced to mitigate, but mitigation we know is taking a very long time, and it's not very successful at the moment. And
so what does that mean?
I was going to say,
what does that mean, Jason? You know too much.
You defined mitigation before, but I'm interested in from the data center perspective, like what are they supposed to do versus what are they actually doing?
So
from a mitigation
if a data center development applies to fill in a portion of a wetland because they're expanding their operations or building, and then they have to go through a permitting process. If that permit's approved through the Indiana Department of Environmental Management, they're forced to mitigate to make up for what they filled in, which is certain ratios depending on the type of wetland it is. But that mitigation has to happen preferably in that watershed or somewhere else. And then they can also buy credits through an in lieu mitigation program through the DNR. But there was a recent Capitol Chronicle article that highlighted that program is currently out of compliance and way behind because they'd like for those mitigation projects to happen within 3 years. And they're severely behind and backed up because there's so many permits that are getting approved to allow these wetlands to be filled in. And that's a major concern of ours that we're watching very closely.
Why are they just letting them take over these wetlands?
That's a good question.
Okay.
We would like to see them not let them take over these wetlands.
Totally.
And what we're seeing too is that data centers, they're going to tell, when they're pitching it to you, they're going to tell the community what they want to hear, and they're handing out lots of money, right?
Right.
To communities. But what we're seeing too is that they're all expanding. You know, and in Fort Wayne right now, they're applying for their third or fourth phase.
I don't know.
And that includes a wetland, filling in a portion of a wetland in an area where Fort Wayne has made great strides in reconstructing wetlands and doing a lot of wetland work. So that's what we like to ask is why are they getting permission to fill these wetlands in? Because that's a major issue.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I want to expand on that a little bit. And I think that this is one of those areas where IDEM, Indiana Department of Environmental Management, can only do what they're permitted to do by law.
Sure.
And so this is an area where, like I work on the air permit side, you work on the water permit side, and we are seeing kind of unprecedented levels of requests from data centers on both air and water issues. So we just recently filed comments related to, I was referencing this before, Meta in Lebanon is, so basically the grid cannot supply the amount of power that this data center needs right away. And so they are applying to put a bunch of engines basically on their site and run them 24/7 to power their data center while the grid is they're calling it bridge power, and it's basically like a stopgap measure until the local utility is able to put the appropriate amount of power onto the grid. And that is not even compared to gas turbines, they're a lot more polluting. There's issues with formaldehyde. There's issues with the maintenance of these engines because they're not meant to run in this way. And yet, IDEM's a little constrained in what they can even do because they don't have the authority to tell a business how to operate.
Sure.
So they can only reject the permit if it meets certain characteristics and certain thresholds. And so that's one of the things that we're really kind of struggling with is that IDEM often doesn't have the guidance to be able to, they don't have the authority to be able to reject these permits, even though we know they're doing environmental harm because that's the guidance that's been handed down from the state level.
Okay. And it's easier for the data center developers to just make it fit into the compliance of IDEM and make it basically impossible for them to either not issue a permit or, I'm assuming, maybe go one step further and be like, hey, you got to stop doing this now until we figure out a different or a better solution for this.
And a lot of it's strategic too. Like I think when we think about Indiana's open for business is a common thing that we hear from the state administration. And so there is, I think, a lot of pressure to get we hear a lot about speed to power, which basically means like data centers want to operate as quickly as they can as soon as they filed their permit. And if, AES can't build a new gas turbine in the next 18 months, they're going to go elsewhere. And so there's a lot of creative engineering happening in terms of how can we get you to stay here? How can we get you to build here? How can we make sure that you have what you need so that you can come online on the timeline that you want to come online? And a lot of times what's happening is things like this bridge power where, and this is happening, by the way, in Virginia too. It's not only in Indiana, but this is the first case we've seen here. This bridge power is a solution because the public infrastructure is not available to be able to support the data center coming online as fast as they want to. And so we're bending over backwards for these companies to make sure that they have everything that they need, even at the cost of the air, water, and electricity affordability in our communities.
Well, literally people's lives. Like I'm assuming, and I'm sure there's maybe no specific direct correlation, but like what's happening, Gary, in Northwest Indiana, like I would assume there's some crossover with how much support we give to the data centers versus how much we're taking away from the communities that need that power, that infrastructure. It also makes me think like in terms of evidence or data or even anecdotal data of why a wetland would be worth keeping around. Like hopefully Muncie can serve maybe as that, especially now that these floods have occurred and that the Muncie wetland worked in the way it was supposed to, and that it was constructed in that way to begin with. And I don't know if there's a way to be like, hey, you can't build over wetlands, but like even to just slow that down would be beneficial overall, even if it was still detrimental to have data centers go up.
Yeah.
Okay. I feel like I don't remember how much time I booked in this room. So
you can do whatever you need to do.
And I'm like, I have a lot more questions. But as we kind of like, again, think about moving forward, I guess I want to start with how do we start to think differently about, I mean, we've already talked about it a lot, I think, in this conversation leading up, but like, especially coming out of the floods, coming out of whenever Gary gets power back, whenever Northwest Indiana kind of starts to find itself in recovery mode, I guess, what does that look like? And then what do those conversations need to look like so that we can be prepared for the inevitable flood, the inevitable rash of tornado storms, or whatever the case might be that we are going to see happen in the future?
Yeah, I mean, it's a multi-pronged approach, but I always encourage people to get involved in local government. I mean, it's really important that you pay attention. And thanks to some new state laws that have been good, you can watch almost any video that you want, your live streamed, meetings, or attend, or, get the agenda ahead of time. Because at the local level, a lot of these decisions are being made by appointed planning commissions or 3 county commissioners. Every county, 92 counties, right, in Indiana, have 3 county executives that we vote for every 4 years, or every 2 years, actually, because there's a little bit of a rotation there. Getting involved at that level, working to establish climate action plans for every community. I know a lot of communities, Earth Charter Indiana helped a lot of communities create climate action plans and resiliency resolutions. And then even trying to encourage local communities to build sustainability commissions, climate commissions, groups of concerned people who can come together and help. Taking that energy that we saw at the Rocky Ripple volleyball court, right? Taking all that sand, taking all of those people who are very passionate and excited, or not excited, but just, diving right in and making a difference. And then, using that energy to show up to these meetings, and then holding our elected officials accountable, advocating for that, at all levels of government. I think that's a really important thing to think about.
I think we need to think about, and I've alluded to this, like, I think we need to think about things as they relate to each other, because I'm sensitive to the idea of politicizing a tragedy, but at the same time, as we're looking at this major flooding event, and we know that in some cases city planning worked and made a significant difference, and we know that in other cases there is a coal ash responsibility that is going to impact, local communities and communities downstream. Thinking about, not just this one event, but the kind of the future that we're looking at if we don't address these kinds of events. There are real known health risks of not addressing these challenges. And I think we're in a political moment where a lot of those protections are being rolled back. And so I think I really do lean on kind of the policy and planning lens and thinking about and advocating for and participating both at the local level and at the federal level and at the state level in being a part of these solutions, because we're just two people. We do our very best, but we have lots of great allies, but we do need the support of people who understand why this is so critical, because maybe we'll end with little Margaret Mead.
Yeah.
Never doubt that a small group of devoted citizens can change the world because they're the only thing that ever has. Yeah. I mean, I do think that really this is, it has to be a collective action solution because there's so much resistance.
Totally.
Yeah.
From a legislative standpoint, what are some things, some bills, other things the session kicks back off or gets ready to kick back off that we should be, obviously go to the Hoosier Environmental Council and link up and learn and get connected and do what you can. But any specific ones that you want to highlight here as we get ready to wrap up that you want to let people know about?
Totally. Yeah. So first and foremost, we do track bills on our website. So if you're interested in learning more as the session kicks off, just go to our website and we'll have a digest of each of the bills that we're looking at and a kind of pro con or this is one we're supporting. This is one that we'd like to see not get passed. And we do play a lot of defense. So we won't necessarily know everything until the bill file deadline. But with that in mind, we're looking at some really cool legislation related to, like I said before, permitting of energy assets, trying to make sure that process is more streamlined. We're also looking at a new technology that came online a couple years ago in Utah that allows people to put a small solar unit on their balcony or in their backyard and plug it directly into their wall outlet, which allows renters and other people who might not have $20,000 to participate in the benefits of solar. And then a third bill related to offering, it's called community energy, but it's basically the idea that if a third party developer has a solar farm and they want to sell you a subscription to that farm, kind of like a co-op, that you should be able to buy from that person. If you don't have a roof that can have solar on it, but you want to participate in the benefits of solar, that should be an available option for you. So that's another one. And then we're looking on the defense side. We expect some more legislation related to wetlands protection that we'll have to fight against, and then also we saw some legislation in the last session related to PFAS chemicals, those forever chemicals that kind of never go away, and defining that class of chemicals really narrowly in state code so that there would be very little protection available. We're expecting that language to come back as well. I know those are two of your bills, but those are the ones that I'm aware of.
That's a great job explaining.
Oh, and redistricting.
Yeah, plenty. The small solar thing, just to make a point, think about all these people in Northwest Indiana. At one point, 300,000 people were out of electricity, couldn't get access to electricity, so everybody went and bought diesel generators.
Yeah.
Think about the air pollution that happened from that as compared to having a small solar unit that they could keep their fridge on or, maybe power their phone for safety and all that. Those are things that are super important and you would think are high priority now as we're seeing what's happening in the world and with our climate and all these disasters that are coming up. So.
Well, I appreciate you both coming through
Absolutely.
and having this conversation. I feel like as much as I wanted to dive deep, I feel like we were just surfacing on a lot of stuff because there's so much, I think, to be covered. And I think that's why it's really important for people to go and begin educating themselves. Hopefully this can be a jumping off point for them or in addition to the knowledge that they already have. As the last question, is there anything else that you want to let people know about, think that they should know about as we kind of move forward and close out here?
I was just going to encourage people to help support those who've been impacted by the flooding.
Totally.
Friends of the White River, which is a great group, they're helping to raise money with the Rapid Flood Response Fund. So they're accepting donations now, and they have somebody who said they'll match that or double what people are donating. And they've also organized people to help do cleanups in the Ravenwood area.
Yep.
So if you go to their website, they actually have like volunteer signups for that. And then anyone who's been impacted, also make sure you go to the 211 website or call and tell them about the damage that you've received. Also, the state has issued some state disaster relief fund grants of up to $5,000 for those who might be eligible. So let's make sure that people are getting the resources that they need during this time. And hopefully Northwest Indiana gets their electricity back on as soon as possible. So, but thanks for having us. I really appreciate this opportunity.
I don't think I could top that. So I'll just say thank you so much for having us.
Absolutely.
And thanks, Jason.
A great way to wrap it up. Appreciate you both.
Thank you.